Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you. Let's get right on into this thing. All right. We're going to answer a couple of questions, or at least talk about them. What is wrong with Tennessee's offense, or is there anything wrong? Also, Pearl has called out the Big Ten pertaining to football. Now, Bruce Pearl's a basketball coach, but he follows sports pretty closely, and he's got the #1 team in the country right now. And we're going to talk about that as well. Let's get into this big question. Is there anything wrong with Tennessee's offense? Because it sure seems like people are talking about it. Now, this was a story by John Adams of the Knoxville News-Sentinel. Now, of course, I grew up with John Adams. I know many of you did. I used to read the sports page in the Knoxville News-Sentinel from cover to cover. And me and my two brothers and my dad, we always fought over the sports page. But anyway, now some people like John Adams, some don't, and that's okay. He's kind of a devil's advocate type of guy. And if you lived in Knoxville and got the News-Sentinel, then you know him very well. But I like somebody that'll just say what they think. Anyway, let's get into this article. He talks about a former play caller that gives his advice on Tennessee's offensive drop-off. And Adams talks about how he believed the offense was unstoppable. And it was in 21 and 22, you could not stop Tennessee's offense. It was unbelievable. We were scoring points so fast, and it was shocking SEC coaches. I remember Shane Beamer and Eli Drinkowitz and even Nick Saban were just freaking out. They were over on the sidelines losing their mind because Hendon Hooker was hitting Jalen Hyatt and all these other great players, just boom, boom, touchdown, touchdown. And they were coming at you 1,000 miles an hour. And it was driving the defensive coordinators and the head coaches especially, nuts. And we thought, oh my gosh, it's going to stay like this forever. Well, there's been adjustments made and changes have happened, and we'll get into that. And he got to talking to Nashville's Watson Brown, who obviously was a big-time play caller. And he talked about how play calling's not nearly as important now as it used to be. He said these college spread offenses are all about counts and numbers. It minimizes play calling. And what this has to do with, and we've talked about this a lot, and you see the commentators, how many's in the box. And what Tennessee does, and they are masters of this, Josh Heupel's the king of it, he will spread you out as far as he possibly can from sideline to sideline. You'll see wide receivers 5 feet off that line and over here too. And what he's going to try to do is force you to decide. I'm either going to stop the run or I'm going to stop the pass. So if you put, 5 guys in the box, the quarterback's got 2 options. He's got a run play and a pass play. He gets up there, he sees there's 5 in the box. Okay, I'm going to run the ball. If he gets up there and there's 6 or 7 in the box, okay, now I'm going to throw it over the top or I'm going to pass. So that's really how they're doing it. And again, the quarterback goes up there with that option. Now, as you can see in 2022, Tennessee led all offenses in the country, scoring 46.1 yards, 46.1 points per game on average, passing 326 yards a game, running about 200. And in 2023, that dropped down to 31.8. Now, that had a lot to do with Joe Milton. Hendon Hooker went to the NFL at the end of 2022. Jalen Hyatt also went to the NFL, who was the Blitnikoff Award winner. So, you're talking about some fantastic players. And even Hendon, who got drafted in the 3rd round, who had a blown ACL, he'd have been in the 1st round. So, a lot of that had to do with the players that we had, and also the defense started changing how they went up against Tennessee's offense. They went into what's called a 3-3-5. So they would open up the run play for Tennessee, but they would take away all those big gash plays where we would burn them for 60-yard touchdown passes, which is what Hendon and Jalen Hyatt were fantastic at. I mean, he would just take off, and typically what would happen is the defense would get confused because we'd get up on the ball in 2 milliseconds, and we'd hike the ball, and we're gone. And they might have been playing one-on-one or trying to switch off, and there might have been some confusion. Next thing you know, Jalen Hyatt's 15 yards behind you, and Hendon always hit him. Well, they've quit that. What they're doing is that 3-3-5, 5 defensive backs, 2 safeties high. It's really hard to get by that many players. So, again, they're giving us the run. And in 2024, we took the run from them, and it worked out pretty good. We didn't score as many as we used to. But as you can see here, we scored 35.7, ran the ball for 225 yards per play, even more than we passed it at 221. And I just went ahead and put this on a chart for you. You can see what Josh Heupel's offenses have done. When he took over as offensive coordinator for Missouri, they went from 13.6 points per game to 31, then 37. Then he took over at UCF where he was the head coach. They scored 43, 43, and 42. Then he took over at Tennessee where Jeremy Pruitt was averaging 21 points a game. We immediately went to 39, then 46, which is when we went to number one. And then we had this switch to Joe Milton, and the defenses switched, and we went to 31 points a game, and now we're at 35. But what's important about 2024, and this is every team's dealing with this, they changed the clock rules dramatically. From this point forward, starting in early 2024, and here was the change. The clock runs constantly. If you'll remember, if you went out of bounds back in 23 and back, the clock stopped until you hiked the ball. Not anymore. As soon as they get that ball spotted, they're running that clock. Also, whenever you got a first down, the clock stopped until they got the chain set up. They don't do that anymore. You get a first down, that clock just keeps running. So you're getting about 10% less plays. So every team is scoring 4 or 5 points less a game. And on top of it, the defenses have gotten better because they're not getting as tired because they're playing 10% less plays. It makes a huge difference. If you've ever watched NFL football, you know most of the scoring happens in the second half. And it's because it's harder to play defense. It's more stressful, and you get more tired. And that's just the reality of playing football. If you've ever played it, you know it's harder to play defense than it is offense because on offense, you know what you're doing immediately because you know the play. On defense, you don't, unless, of course, you played for Michigan for 2.5 years and Connor Stalions told you exactly what the play was that was coming at you.
It's got to be America's team.
Anyway, so all those changes have really made a difference. I think Tennessee's offense is in great shape long term, but I did expect a pullback with the changes with the clock rule and also a redshirt freshman quarterback as opposed to a fifth-year senior in Hendon Hooker. I can go ahead and tell you if for some reason Nico Iamaleava wound up being at Tennessee for 5 years, which there's virtually no chance of that, he would be unbelievably better than he was last year, and he was pretty good as a redshirt freshman. When you've played college football for 4 and 5 years, like Hendon did, it slows down for you. And when you play that first year, it's coming at you like your house is on fire. I mean, it's just kind of how it is. So I don't think our offense is in trouble. I think there's been adjustments by the defense, and we had a redshirt freshman quarterback. And you'll see a change. You'll see Nico playing better. It's going to slow down for him, and he'll have better numbers. He threw for like 2,500 yards. He'll probably throw for 3,000. You'll see him run the ball a little bit more. He's a very good runner, but we couldn't afford to let him run because we didn't have a backup quarterback that was a big-time talent. Now, we had Gaston Moore was a fifth-year senior, but he was a walk-on. So you can probably allow him to run a little bit more, and he'll weigh 20 pounds more. He's going to keep putting on weight till he hits about 235. Anyway, I did want to cover that offensive story. I don't think our offense is a problem at all. I really don't. I just think the defense has made a change, and the clock rules change. All right, now let's talk about Bruce Pearl. He took a big-time jab at Big Ten football of all things, and of course, he's a basketball coach. But Bruce Pearl's he loves sports, and he thinks the Big Ten performed better, partly because they're top-heavy. They have a bunch of great teams on the top, and they've got a bunch of easier teams at the bottom, so they don't have to play as many tough games as you do in the SEC. And this is a story on Saturday Down South by Paul Harvey. I don't know if he's related to the first Paul Harvey that everybody remembers. Y'all all remember that. Good day. Anyway, that may be beside the point. Talks about how he took a shot at him. Let's see what he had to say. It says Pearl was asked by the host of the Gary Parrish Show about the impending SEC basketball tournament and the likelihood the Tigers could be standing on Sunday to play the championship game. And there's a lot of talk about whether or not a team in basketball should even play in that tournament past the first game. Maybe you ought to just sort of halfway play and let yourself get knocked out of the SEC tournament because you have to immediately play after you're done in the NCAA tournament. If you go to the finals, you're not going to get any rest, and your guys' legs might not be there. So a lot of teams in the SEC are like, I don't know if I really want to win that tournament unless I have to have it to get in. So That's what Bruce Pearl's talking about here, and he actually compared it to football. And he said, I'm going to equate that question to football. He said, I'll get beat up a little bit for this, but top to bottom, the Big Ten in football is not as strong as the SEC. He said, go to Mississippi State when they're having a bad year and half your kids are in the hospital when you leave the game. He said, it is every single night. He said, I thought our SEC football teams were exhausted. You look at Ole Miss and what they had to go through, the incredible grind. And, of course, they had to go down to the Swamp their last game. And Florida was good last year. I know everybody was making fun of them, but I was like, this team's good, especially with DJ Lagway. That team plays different with DJ. Anyway, they got beat. And it didn't surprise me in the slightest. I think had DJ not gotten hurt in that Georgia game, they'd have beat Georgia.
How dare you!
So look for Florida to be tough this year at the Swamp. Pearl said the two Big Ten teams Pearl felt the need to specifically address was Ohio State and Penn State. He said two teams who reached the semifinals and eventual champion. Pearl said those two programs only had 2 or 3 big games comparable to what the SEC's heavy hitters had to go through.
Oh, well, there's strikes 2 and 3 right there.
And he said the entire schedule at the SEC, there's 7 or 8 tough games. He said, I think the football teams were exhausted. Now, obviously, the Big Ten's not going to like that. And here's the thing about the Big Ten and whether or not they've matched up to the SEC. The top teams absolutely have. They've improved dramatically. Bringing in Oregon was a big get for them from the Pac-12. And they've got some of the best teams in the country now. Now, a big part of that changed that is NIL. Because years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, the Big Ten was not in the same league as the SEC, and that was pretty obvious. Every time a Big Ten team got into the playoff, Alabama would whoop them, Georgia would whoop them, or whoever, maybe LSU. That has changed, and it's because their talent level has raised dramatically. And again, this has everything to do with NIL. Look at the top teams up here. Oregon's number 1 in spending, and they were the number 1 team in this country most of the year. Ohio State was 4th. Notre Dame was 3rd. And you can see those teams had a lot of success. 3 of those 4, and so did Texas. So did Georgia, and all down the line. And if you're not on this list, you can forget it. I mean, look at Indiana. Everybody was wondering how Indiana got so good. They spent $13.6 million. That's how they got good. If you're not on this list, you're done. So the Big Ten, to their credit, made changes. And they got guys like Jeremiah Smith, and they went and got Caleb Downs from Alabama, who was the best safety in the country. And when Nick Saban retired, Ohio State, they pulled their money together. They literally put out a notice to their fans, said, do you want Caleb Downs? Next thing you know, their NIL websites crashed. They were getting so much money sent to them. That's how they were able to pay him 7 figures. When you want it bad enough, you can get it. So I think there's some truth in that. Definitely the SEC from top to bottom is a tougher league. But the Big Ten has matched up to the SEC in the top 4 or 5. They just have. It's a fact. The bottom has not caught up yet. That may change with this revenue sharing deal because the Big Ten's getting as much money or more. They're getting more money than the SEC. So if they spend that 20.5, you may see the bottom of the Big Ten improve dramatically. You may not. Depends on how much they spend, how much they take in ticket sales, because you don't have to spend the whole 20. And you may not have it to spend. A lot of these organizations and universities are losing money on sports because the football team has to carry everything else. That's just a fact. They carry most of the men's teams and most of the women's teams, except maybe women's basketball. They don't have to carry as much, but most of them they do. This is just a fact. It's how it is. Anyway, I thought those were 2 interesting stories. We talked about Tennessee's offense and also Bruce Pearl giving a jab to the Big Ten, which is a little bit justified, but it may not be long term. Anyway, if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Let's be able to continue to cover all these big college sports stories. If you've not subscribed, hit this button right here. Won't cost you a dime, help you get my videos. And right over here is the most recent video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy based on your viewing history. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.
Goodbye, old friend. May the force be with you.